Great insights, great way to kick us off for the day. And I'm really honored now to introduce our next panel. We're going to be focusing in a conversation on how we expand on some of the ideas and the chancellors that Deborah and the chancellors just mentioned about increasing the level and the speed of U.S. innovation tenfold. And how can we really think about new strategies and new investments to help us achieve this goal as a nation? So as we gather here today, and I think as Deborah punctuated in her remarks, it's really important to, I think, emphasize and double down on the significance of the task that's in front of us. This goal of increasing innovation speed, capacity, capability tenfold is a really tall order, but it's crucial. And I think the latest pandemic has highlighted the importance of innovation to address these global challenges and how we can advance human progress. And so, to this end, our first phase of the National Commission had several key strategies to do this. One, of course, was the increase of investment in federal research and development dollars. Another, of course, is the important strategy on how we secure U.S. leadership in critical technologies. We also have to talk about an issue Deborah just raised about how do we bridge the valley of death and ensure that more small and medium-sized firms are able to actually develop and deploy in this country. And then finally, how do we really encourage, how do we build efforts that will enable more Americans to become innovators and entrepreneurs? So we know that the Biden administration and Congress have launched ambitious plans to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in research, technology development, the manufacturing of semiconductors and advanced microelectronics, infrastructure, clean energy, STEM education and training. All of those are issues we're going to talk about today and tomorrow. And all of these investments could hold tremendous power in leading to significant future economic and productivity growth, national security, new business formation, industrial deepening, new job creation, all the things that we define and equate to U.S. competitiveness. So, over the course of this next discussion, we're going to dive into some of those issues, and I'd like to ask some colleagues to join Deborah and me on stage. First of all, the director of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Steve Ashby, the vice president for research, economic development, and knowledge enterprise at the University of Texas at San Antonio, Jacqueline Shaw. Thanks, Jacqueline. And the president of the Academy of Arts University, Elisa Stevens. Thank you all for hopping up. We'll grab you some mics. So, as we kick off, I'm going to pose one or two big questions. I'm going to ask each of you maybe to address them. I'll maybe nudge a few of you on some specifics. But the first big question I'd love for you all to think about is one of the last points I made about investments. In order to maintain our long-term competitiveness, we know we have to have investments in critical technologies, critical innovations. I guess the question I have is, why is that so important? Do we actually have to be the masters of our domain in every discipline, every domain, in this sort of hyper-connected, hyper-fast world? And if so, why? Steve, I'm wondering if I could really maybe turn to you first. We talked about, in some of our opening comments, the significant new investments from the Biden administration and Congress, but also I think the role, a new spotlight on the role that the federal government has an important role to play in this innovation ecosystem. And of course, in that federal role, the national labs are tremendously powerful actors. So from that purview, could you talk a little bit about what you're doing, your lab, maybe the National Lab Enterprise, to really, I think, turbocharge our innovation ecosystem for the future?
Sure. I'll keep going, and lunch will be served after my remarks. One is, first of all, I appreciate the council organizing this event and all that you do to bring us together. I think it's really important to have these conversations. But the Department of Energy for nearly 8 decades has stewarded a system of national laboratories that serve the country well. And if you haven't visited a national laboratory, I encourage you to do so. How many people have been to a national laboratory? All right, good turnout there, and the council certainly facilitates that. But it's really our role at the national labs to be at the forefront of certain areas of science and technology in service of our nation. We're really there to address some of the critical challenges facing our country and the world. And so that's a key role that we play. And increasingly, it's about what we're doing to sustain and advance American economic competitiveness, as well as our energy, and national security. And so you see the different national labs playing in each of those areas. And there's a lot going on right now at the national labs, and certainly I'll just pick a few areas where there's a lot of work going on, and this is not meant to be at all exhaustive, but just illustrative. We've talked about clean energy and sustainability. That's going to be a theme. We're going to hear about net zero and things like that coming up. And certainly across the national labs, there's a huge amount being invested in clean energy technologies, what we're doing to modernize our electric grid, and what we're doing really to improve the resiliency of our energy systems. At our laboratory alone, we're working in a variety of these areas, awarded through these competitive grants. For example, I'll just call out some of the work that we're doing in energy storage, which is really a key to how you can incorporate intermittence into the grid. And so we're working in everything from consumer electronics to electric vehicles all the way up to grid scale storage. And they're one of the things to facilitate this acceleration of progress, the 10x that you're looking at, is something called the Grid Storage Launchpad at Nat'l, where we'll work with industry to test out prototypes up to 100 kilowatt hours before they're displayed at scale to the grid. A second area we're partnering with industry is in advanced manufacturing. Our colleagues at Oak Ridge and Lawrence Livermore have done a whole lot in the area of 3D printing and really bringing that to a variety of different applications. At Nat'l, we're doing something called solid phase processing, and it's really a special technology we call SHAPE. You can remember their acronym. We like our acronyms, and that is about shear-assisted processing extrusion. I won't go into the details of it. It's an amazing technology where, without going to melting temperatures, you can take scrap metal, say scrap aluminum, and add a little bit of magic pixie Nat'l dust to it, and you end up with, say, tubing with extraordinary performance properties that are 90% less carbon footprint, 50% energy savings compared to typical techniques. The final example is in computing. DOE has long led the way in computing, and today we're also doing that for the quest for quantum computing. At Nat'l, we're working with industry to look at different ways of making qubits that they'll be building blocks of the future computers. These are just three areas across the range of technology we're interested in, and each one requires partnership with academia, other laboratories, and especially industry if we're going to accelerate that deployment. So there's a few remarks I'd make there.
Thanks, Steve. And Jacqueline, I wonder if you could maybe jump in here. So tremendous, incredible stories that Steve just told from the labs. What about from the university community? Universities are going to be, I think, receiving, at least in the short term, significant, we hope, increases in the research funding. That's actually some work the council needs to do with folks back in DC to make that happen. But I'd love to hear from your perspective what's happening in Texas. Where are you all investing, and where do you see the future going?
Absolutely. So the University of Texas at San Antonio is in a unique position in San Antonio. We have a lot of the ingredients needed to really drive technology innovation. But as we see these large investments from, federal investments, industry investments, we see how complex they are. They're trying to solve challenges that one university or even one region alone cannot really dive in and solve on its own. So in San Antonio, we're first looking at our ecosystem. We have a rich, dense ecosystem of federal defense-related partners. We have both healthcare and, the digital economy in San Antonio. We're very uniquely positioned along the Texas-Mexico border. Mm-hmm. So for us, we're not only looking at domestic partnerships and how we drive that agenda, we're trying to find ways to be innovative, despite, policies at times that make it difficult to partner with our neighbors in Mexico. We're looking at all of this and how we, advance technology innovation in the country. And we partner deeply with the national labs, PNNL, Oak Ridge, Sandia, and Idaho National Lab. Mm-hmm. 3 of the 4 actually sit on our complex in San Antonio. So we're really having to take a very diverse approach to how we participate in this new agenda. And we also had to look at ourselves because, back to your comment, we can't be everything to everyone. Yeah. We have to really look at where we're good, where we have roots, and who's going to support us in that part of our journey forward. So with UT San Antonio, we're situated more so, probably 90% of our university outside of the city. And we really have been moving to be a urban, dense, Hispanic-serving institution in downtown San Antonio. So our president, who couldn't be here today, I'm very honored to participate on his behalf, when he came 5 years ago, decided we are going to invest and build downtown San Antonio and then drive our partners to be there with us. And so January of this year, we opened a complex, first of multiple buildings, that is going to drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic development for the city. And we're really doubling down on our digital economy investments. So a school of data science, and then we tied it in with the National Security Collaboration Center to densify those partnerships. And we have dozens of companies, at least a dozen federal agencies sitting with us every day in this facility. And we've had to build the R&D capabilities around it, applied technology labs. But it's challenging because everyone's doing the same, and there's great examples of that in this room today.
Yeah, yes, and I think that's perhaps one of the bright spots in the U.S. national system, that we are seeing this increased densification around not just urban areas, but in other parts of the country. And I think both you and Steve have highlighted how you're instantiating, you really are trying to create these ecosystems. And I think the more we hear and learn from leaders like you, and we'll talk about that in some of our working groups, particularly our working group on the future of place-based innovation. But at least I'm wondering, having heard from Steve and Jacqueline, any thoughts or reactions? You lead a very special institution. And I'd actually like to tee you up on a question about people, because I think one of the, in addition to obviously place, it's also about the people and skills and the creative mindset, and how do we create a future of Americans, a future generation of Americans who are thinking creatively about how to be innovative, and how are you creating those pathways for American students?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me up here. I'm a bit of the odd duck. I hope I can turn into a swan up here, running an art and design school, which is almost 100 years old in downtown San Francisco. So you know we're in a very creative environment by definition. And I think creativity is often misunderstood. And many of us think it's between having, people have it or they don't have it. You often hear people say, geez, I'm not creative at all. But the truth of the matter is that is really not how it operates. We did a study recently, we commissioned it, and over 90% of the people said that they felt they were creative, and over 50% said they felt that they were known for being creative, yet not that many people have the courage to apply to an art school. So I think our population in the United States, we have a huge population of creative people. And why is that important? It's important because that's where it all starts. It starts with drawing, it starts with design, it starts with the wrist. That's how the idea gets put down on paper. I'd like to say that it really takes a village. We have the creative geniuses, we have the one genius, but it takes a team. We have Edison, he created the light bulb, but he also created the camera. He created over 1,000 patents. He didn't do that alone. It really does take a creative village. So I'd like to suggest that we're missing a lot of people in the United States who would like to have the opportunity to learn to express themselves creatively and also then partner with scientists. As an art school, we actually have 8 STEM programs, and we emphasize art, so of course it becomes STEAM. In our car design program, we're partnering heavily with industry and have for decades. And the auto industry is looking to the future of what students can bring to the table for not only sustainability, but lifestyle. Our architecture students also partner with industry as well as the interior design students on sustainability, fashion students on sustainability, all with industry sponsored projects. So it becomes very important that the creative mind is involved in the teams that our country is developing, especially scientists, because there's a big overlap, whether the civilian realizes it or not, with artists. So I think one example I would give right away is with AI, and creatives think outside the AI box, but we're using AI in almost every field right now. The artist is, which is prompting, and the person prompting is creative. Michelangelo, creative, Da Vinci, they're constant lifelong learners. They see more, they see through drawing. That's a fundamental skill. So I'd argue that technology is vital. We stay way ahead of it. We try to stay 6 months ahead of it, which is a challenge just in and of itself. But we see the designer and the artist as the driver of those tools. Advertising agencies are using the Chat GPT, there's Lexica, DALL-E, Midjourney, and our students are learning that. They'll be learning it in the summer. But it's all in play, and it's moving very, very, very quickly.
Well, very fast. I mean, I think we've been joking in the council with Deborah and some of our colleagues for the past month about the power of ChatGPT. It's also its limitations, and I know even here over today and tomorrow in some of our breakout sessions, we'll have some folks sharing maybe some ideas from ChatGPT. But Elisa, you mentioned something that was important, and I'd love to hear from Deborah and Jacqueline and Steve on. You talked about the creative mind, and what I heard from Steve and Jacqueline, at least, on these incredible technologies are the people. So I'd love to maybe go deeper with all of you on what are the very specific strengths that your type of institution has to bring to the national innovation ecosystem. Because while there are some similarities, there are differences. And I'd love to also, to hear from you on this, Deborah, because you've been on many advisory boards at national labs. You've been on the same with universities, so you've seen both as well. So I'd love all of you to maybe hop in on that, but Deborah, I don't know if you want to go first or.
Well, let me thank our panelists for their very insightful remarks. And I think on the issue of creativity, you also bring in, Elisa, and you do this beautifully. I mean, you all should visit her extended campus in San Francisco. It's amazing. But imagination. And imagination is really a higher order of thinking. And one of the things that we did at the council that was so powerful, we really launched this movement in partnership with Lockheed Martin, and that was the National Engineering Forum. That, we talk about STEM, but often the E is silent in STEM, and yet at the end of the day, it's the engineers who take all of this and, make the building that you imagine. Winston Churchill said, we don't have a harbor for Normandy invasion, but we're going to make one, but that had to be engineered. So that linkage between engineering and imagination and how the science and technology comes in is fabulous. But for the Council on Competitiveness, and I think many in the room, of course, know us, we are unique because we bring thinking and experience and action from these different sectors. And I'll just share a story. He would not mind if I told this. Our chairman, Brian Moynihan, is the chairman and CEO of Bank of America, and we're thrilled to have him as our chairman. And he said to me after one of our annual meetings, he said, I sat next to one of these people from one of these national labs, and I didn't even know what they were doing, and it was just brilliant. And, here's a major CEO who's learning and getting value from that. And similarly, people who sit next to a university. But so bringing together, and we haven't even mentioned the labor unions, how important they are on this. So we kind of bring that cauldron together, and we often call it a cauldron of creativity for competitiveness policy, but we're engineers too. And we have to link, so we're ultimately systems engineers for competitiveness policy. And you can't do that without the experience and thinking of people like everyone in this room.
Steve or Jacqueline or Lisa, you want to?
Yeah, well, I want to hit on this theme of people. Right? Institutions exist, and we often think about institutions competing, but it's people who compete, as people innovate. And so to the point being made there, the most important asset we have are the people and what we're doing. And I think going to the competitiveness advantage of the United States and some of our allies, it gets to a point you were making earlier of you look at what's going on in the world, and I think one of the things we have to do is recognize, in my opinion, that part of why America is so innovative is not just because of what we do to nurture the people within the country, but also our value system. What we do and what we value, and I think that lends itself to that creativity. But in doing that, we have left a lot of people behind, and that point was made in the previous panel. And we need to include more of the creative people, because we need that creativity. We need the engineers to take all that and bring it together. And so you were asking what our institutions are doing. So I'd say in DOE, there's a keen focus on what we're doing to collaborate across organizational, institutional boundaries. But I'd say, for example, the labs, one of the things I think is a hallmark of many of the national labs, increasingly research enterprise generally, is the multidisciplinary nature of what we do to bring together scientists and engineers of different disciplines, but also of different perspectives and backgrounds. And I think there's a number of programs offered by the Department of Energy and implemented at the national labs to bring in underrepresented populations, to give them a chance. Because the national labs were blessed with the upstairs facilities and equipment. And many times these students, including undergraduates, at P&L alone, we had 1,500 interns last summer, about 40% undergrad, 60% graduate students. And for many of them, this is their first opportunity to really see what science looks like at scale and have access to upstairs equipment. And so I think doing that is a key part of what we can do, bring those in. And although I'm not underrepresented, I certainly would never thought about going to a national laboratory until I visited one as a graduate student, and it changed my career trajectory forever. And we need to do that for more of the kids who traditionally don't think about STEM and certainly don't think about an R&D experience at a national lab.
Right. So it's about visibility, expanding a horizon, giving opportunity. Jacqueline?
I'll say for UT San Antonio, and I might take the liberty to say for UT System, which is a large, second largest university system in the country, particularly driving those universities that are Hispanic serving institutions and doing it in a way that supports what it means to be an HSI. And so UTSA is one of only 21 that are HSI and a research intensive R1 university. So San Antonio is a unique opportunity. The demography of San Antonio is the demography of the future of the United States in 2040. The Texas demographer sits with us. So we try to build on that HSI status and support our students in a way that will get them to jobs, not only in our region, which is difficult because in South Texas, there's 20 of the poorest census tracts in the country just within our reach. And so we have a really big responsibility while also driving our agenda in military, City USA, to support national security and defense. And that's a hard line where you're trying to be the HSI and support the culture and what you stand for, and also driving home that national security support system. So UTSA does that very well, and I think that's a unique outlier. And I'd say for UT System as a whole, I think we do that well.
Well, I think what you've just described is the success of the United States depends on the success of the experiment you're running right now,
Absolutely.
given the demography of where we are. And so we want to continue to work with you on that. Elisa, any further thoughts? Or
Yes, the Academy of Art University believes and has from its inception that we want to give every student an opportunity to experience art and design. And we start that in high school with a free tuition scholarship program for 2,000 students so that they can come in and shop and see if they may want to do this thing called art and design. And then a second point, which was brought up earlier, we have a no barriers policy. We have open access. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. But in our experience, it's been important to have that open access. We don't require SATs. We don't require a portfolio. They have to have a minimal GPA out of their high schools. And we've really held to the thought process that a person's past doesn't predict their future for purposes of art and design. And that transcends their age. They could be 35 and decide they want to now do this thing called art and design. So I think it's important, although some universities have done away with maybe a test requirement with SATs, they still demand a GPA and or a portfolio. And I think that barrier is a big barrier to access. And we haven't seen that it hurts our end result when they graduate. And we are more career focused and always have been, and do have roots in trade and technical, although we've become so degree focused with masters and bachelors that I feel the university is having a harder time getting back to their welding mission, so to speak, which is what our government wants, more trade technical. So I would say if there's an opportunity to have the no barriers approach, that will embrace a large percent of our population in America, which is not going to college. I do have an 18-year-old. I'm an old mom, and he's at Culver Academies. He's just wanted to go into the military since he was 5 and be an officer. It's just the only thing he wants, military history. And he said something a little disconcerting to me as he's looking at colleges. He goes, "Mom, the colleges are all going to be white and Chinese." And I paused, I was born in 58, so I have a bit different view. And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yep." And I thought to myself, when I think of all the vast melting pot of the United States, that there's a lot of people that are being left behind that we as a country cannot afford to have left behind. And a percentage of them, based on this commissioned report, they think they're creative. And I think that challenge needs to be met head on.
Well, this idea that you're helping to lower risk, you're helping people to see there's a different path, and you're opening up opportunities. And I think for us to learn from you and to think about how do you scale that across the country so that there's greater flexibility. I think the research is showing that fewer and fewer students are necessarily looking at the traditional university path, or maybe they want to work for a little bit and go back to school, or maybe they want certification after certification. So this idea of being a more flexible nation is challenging. I do think actually the U.S. has some global advantage there, which actually I think is the bright spot here. As we begin to close down, I want to just ask one final question to all of you. And Deborah, maybe if you don't mind, I'll start with you, because you just addressed this question in front of a nearly 4-hour congressional hearing in front of the House Science Committee, its first hearing in the new Congress. And it was really about roadblocks, in the sense of what are the big challenges facing the United States today? And if we want to maintain our productivity, and in fact, actually in some sense, reignite our productivity, but also maintain our national security, our economic growth, our inclusive prosperity, what do we have to begin tackling right now in order to be innovative and competitive for the next 50 years?
Well, I'm not going to repeat all the very important insights our two chancellors in this panel have shared. I'll bring in some different things that are essential. One, we are in intense global competition. It's also partnership, but we're competing, with a country, China particularly, not companies. We have different rules of the road that are being shaped outside of our value system. Standards issues are huge for this. I'm looking at Dr. Willie May, he knows this. Our standard system, often it's voluntary, but it doesn't put us in a position to compete with a country like China. I mean, China's leading the World Intellectual Property Organization. I mean, does that tell you something? I'm on the Commission for the Theft of American Intellectual Property, and back in 2012, the amount of cyber attacks and the impact on our economy was staggering then, and it's even more. But what I'm trying to say here is we don't have a silver bullet. People, of course, are the most important ultimately, and there are many things to do with that. Our K through 12 system we haven't discussed yet. That, is another tremendous barrier. But we shouldn't be competing on tax policy. We shouldn't be competing on regulatory issues that, tie our hands so we can't do anything. I mean, there are whole classes of industrial activity we don't do in the United States because of treble damages and product liability. And all those operations have moved overseas. So I think, one of the big challenges is to optimize the things we can, that we have control of, and then also set the platter for the things that we need to do. And it ultimately, you can look at all of these as the infrastructure. It's the infrastructure for innovation. We're way behind on a lot of the urban transit infrastructure. That's a huge issue for people who are working, have to get to work, et cetera, et cetera. So there are many, many things. And I guess the one recommendation that I didn't mention, we should mention, is we have bits and pieces of federal coordination, but we don't really have a coordinated, integrated strategy. We don't have something for innovation and competitiveness like the National Security Council or the Economic Council, and we've recommended that. OSDP has its part, but OSDP is not looking at competition policy. They're not looking at, a universal tax system and what that means. They're not looking at, how China wants to re-regulate the internet, maybe a little bit. But we need that. And we need these issues at the highest level of our country. And they need to be integrated with national security. And, that's the reality. So we need to do a much better job of, yes, coordinating, but integrating and taking all our assets. We have tremendous assets, but often they exist in these stovepipes. And then the thing that is the most important ultimately is we have to have this country from coast to coast and throughout where we have vibrant innovation centers and cultures and people, not just on the two coasts.
Well, Deborah, you're helping us to prioritize, and this will, I think, guide us for the rest of the today and tomorrow. One of the interesting comments from a member of Congress to your testimony was, well, madam, we can't invest in everything. We're in a massive deficit situation. So I want to end this panel by asking, what can we not afford to not invest in this country?
Well, our people at one level, but on here, I would agree earlier, your first question about things, can we still be the best at everything? I would say probably not. But it doesn't mean we should try to be second or third at everything. Right. I think there are areas where we should identify that these are critical to our economic and national security. All right, and there should be a way of doing that as a country, and we pick those areas. When I look at barriers,
that's a double win. That's a security win and an economic win.
Yes, and I think for the United States, those are intertwined. I mean, right now, our dollar is the superpower. We've heard some commentators talk about, right? And so our economic position is so important to us. But when I look at barriers, one thing we have to do is invest in R&D. If you read the council reports, it calls very clearly for a return to a mere 2% of our GDP going to R&D. One of the biggest barriers I have to deal with, federal.
We were in 1960.
Right, when I was born. And so you have to look at these things and ask, all right, what are you going to invest in? And I think one of the biggest problems I have as a lab director, if you're going to staff and they're seeing in the annual appropriations process, this whipsaw, right? The taxpayers have been very generous at the end of the day in terms of what you look at the funding in R&D. We're still not at that 2%. But the process of getting there generates a lot of angst and questions for people about, do I really want to commit to a career in the national labs or research? Because it seems to be very mercurial as to what Congress wants to do. So I think steady investment. I think earlier we heard from the chancellors, another barrier is our antiquated intellectual property practices and what we're doing to exploit the intellectual property the American taxpayers fund, and recognize that we have to upgrade those policies. And I think it also, when we look to deploy technologies, we have to look beyond the valleys of death and ask, what are we doing to help shape not the product and the individual company, but a market in terms of the regulatory practices to be ready to accept innovations. So there's a lot of these barriers that we're having, and I think we have to invest in some of these things. And yes, there's a lot of challenges we have, but I think when you look at the amount we spend on R&D as a country, we are not going to balance the budget by zeroing it out.
Lisa, Jacqueline, any final thoughts?
Well, I'll say, following phase one, there have been some big wins, I think, in investments from many agencies in regional innovation, technology innovation. We have, ARPA-H coming online, BARDA, ARPA-E, et cetera. But I think one thing that we should look at as a whole is what are the measures of success across investment in technology innovation and regional innovation, so that we are not having duplicity in efforts, and that we're really understanding if we're having a true impact, a broader impact on the communities we serve. And so I think that's one thing I would say. And we also have to look back further in the pipeline and, just at the most simple level, K through 12, making sure that every small child knows that they can be a technology innovator, that they can innovate solutions, that they can run a business one day. So I think that we need to have more investment in that area because we have to look to the future and make sure that our growing population can meet those needs of the future.
Jacqueline, I'm not going to try to steal a thunder from one of our future keynoters today, Jed Kolko, and actually I don't know if he's going to raise this, but you mentioned the measurement point. He's the Undersecretary for Commerce. He's point person for Secretary Raimondo, President Biden, on thinking about the future of place-based innovations. And as an economist, I might guess he has some ideas around how do you measure that sort of success? Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to respond to that member of Congress who asks, why are we making these investments?
Chad, let me just add one little point
please.
there. Often you hear, oh, we have so many startups. We're the place that has all these startups. But nobody asks the question, well, how many are still around in 3 years or 5 years? How many have been acquired by China? Where are the jobs, et cetera? Just counting how many startups you have is not the metric.
Good point. Lisa, any thoughts?
I would just follow up with what Jacqueline said. I think it's K through 12 and also probably the junior colleges, whose mission was very training based at one point, but they've now become more ideologues like Harvard and Yale in the people they're producing, and less on nuts and bolt training. And I'd like to see, I think, more nuts and bolt training across the country at the K through 12 level, junior college level, and it's certainly what art and design universities are doing. They don't have shop. They don't have a lot of classes that they used to have that would feed nicely into innovation technology. I think students should be in high school early on, maybe K through 8, they should be on technology. I'm a big believer in technology.
I want to thank this panel. You've given us, I think, some important priorities as we go forward today and tomorrow, and of course for the commission. Just a signal for everyone here, one of the important reasons we came to Davis to start this conversation is that we already know in December 15th, we will be together in Washington, D.C. for our National Competitiveness Forum, and we have to deliver as a community our next big set of recommendations. Davis is the instantiation of the beginning of that recommendation process. This panel has already given us several priorities, and so I encourage us to learn from them. Let's take that back to our working groups later today and tomorrow. But for now, thank you, panelists.